Adam, have there been no demonstrations over the past 24 hours?
Well, as far as we're aware, things are a lot quieter now than they have been over the weekend and the summer stages of the early hours of Monday as well. It does seem that the authorities have started to get a bit of a grip on this situation now. We saw a heavy police presence in Shanghai yesterday, which was one of the hubs of these protests. A lot of streets barricaded off, police officers ensuring that people couldn't be gathering, and also asking people who were taking photos or videos to delete that footage. So I think people are realizing that the authorities are starting to take this very seriously now. Heavy security presence in potential hotspots. Also, as well, the government censors in China will be going to work now to try and wipe these protests off social media, off the internet in China. They don't want people to be sharing images. They don't want people to be sharing posts. So I'm sure they're hard at work as well. We did see some demonstrations on Monday, even in Hong Kong, a city which has seen plenty of protests in recent years. There were some demonstrations coming out in unity with people on the mainland. But overall, it's been fairly quiet on the protest front. Whether or not it remains that way, it's going to be very interesting to see. It probably depends a lot on what the government does now, whether or not they try to change course, try to improve things and improve the situation for people living in China at the moment. But I'm sure as well, given the mass intelligence and surveillance available to the authorities in China, they'll be starting to try and track down exactly who was behind these protests and try and find out whether or not, they're planning more or what the next stage is for possibly more dissent on the streets.
Yeah, and as far as COVID is concerned, is there any indication that the government may be moving away from the strict zero COVID policies?
We're not seeing strong indications of that, really. Even before these protests, it was a big talking point when it comes to China and whether or not they would eventually start to move away from zero COVID. Just a few weeks ago, they did make some changes. They're only small things like how secondary contacts are treated or quarantining when entering the country from abroad. But it did seem like there were starting to be some changes. Although you've got to remember that a lot of these rules and restrictions are implemented at a local level. So it's local authorities who are actually putting in place the rules that come from the government. And the message from the top remains that zero COVID is the policy. And we've seen no change in that from the government, that line of messaging at the moment. So they don't want big outbreaks in their areas and their regions. So therefore, they're still being very strict on a lower level. So unless that messaging changes from the top, I don't think we're going to see any dramatic changes. And as ever, the issue remains a public health issue. If China does indeed open up now, it decides to end zero COVID and let the virus spread through the community, given the fact that so few people in China have actually had this virus, given the concerns over the vaccines that China is using, plus the levels of vaccination, it could be a public health emergency, according to experts, with many questioning whether hospitals and ICU units, particularly in remote regional areas of China, would be able to cope with the surge of cases that you would see.
Thanks very much indeed, Adam. Really appreciate it. Adam Hancock in Singapore.